Lake Iliamna is anything but peaceful. And according to their stories, their warnings, and their centuries of accumulated knowledge, it is home to something that is killed.
The sun rises over Lake Iliamna, casting steel-gray light across its vast, icy surface, calm and unassuming at first glance. Yet beneath those frigid waters lies a darkness few can truly comprehend. Stretching 77 miles and plunging to nearly 1,000 feet, the lake remains largely unexplored, a cold and silent abyss. Standing on its shores brings an eerie tension, especially with local reports of massive creatures reaching up to 60 feet long. Connected to the Bering Sea by the winding Kvichak River, the lake could allow enormous marine predators, or something unknown, to slip into its depths. Today, we explore Alaska's lake monster, far more terrifying than Jaws itself. You might prefer to stay safely ashore. Historical sightings. Lake Iliamna is the kind of place that makes even seasoned outdoorsmen pause. Stretching roughly 77 miles long and plunging close to 1,000 feet deep, this immense freshwater body in southwestern Alaska is larger than some seas and barely explored beneath its cold, dark waves. It's a lake with salmon runs in the millions each year and resident freshwater harbor seals that likely swam in from the open ocean long ago. But for nearly a century, it has also been the stage for mysterious sightings that blur the line between biology and legend. It all began in 1942, when Babe Allsworth was flying a Stinson ferry plane with government wildlife agent Bill Hammersley when they passed over a vast stretch of water near an unnamed island. As they neared, what looked like specks in the water resolved into dozens of massive, elongated shapes, moving in apparent formation just under the surface. The creatures were described as 25 to 30 feet long, with what the witnesses likened to metallic backs glinting in the light, a description that stuck in the minds of both men. That 1942 sighting didn't remain an isolated anecdote. In 1963, an unnamed state wildlife biologist was flying solo over the lake when he saw something even more bewildering. From his small aircraft,
looking down, flying in, seeing the glaciers and the mountain peaks, the rivers.
The biologist watched a creature estimated at 25 to 30 feet in length glide beneath the surface for a full 10 minutes without ever breaking for air. By comparing the creature's size to the shadow of his plane on the water, he was left with one conclusion. What he saw was no known fish or seal, at least not one familiar to science. Through the 1970s and 1980s, stories shifted from single observers to large groups and multiple witness reports. In 1977, veteran air taxi pilot Tim Laporte and his passengers spotted something near Pedro Bay at the northeast end of the lake. Flying just a few hundred feet above a mirror-calm surface, they saw a massive, fish-like form slip beneath the water. As they banked closer, the creature made a huge, arching splash and dove, its vertical tail fin slicing downward. The group estimated its length at 12 to 14 feet. Laporte's account to the Federal Aviation Administration was notable because it came from an experienced pilot who had flown that region for years. Not all sightings were from above. 1979 brought an unusual report from Pedro Bay, where a group of locals, 3 in a boat and several others watching from shore, described observing a black, fish-like creature with what one witness thought looked like a fin and even a white stripe. What makes these sightings stand apart from typical lake monster tales is not just the sheer consistency of descriptions, but the professional nature of many witnesses. Pilots, biologists, commercial fishermen, and village residents whose lives have revolved around this lake for generations. Some sightings describe groups of creatures, others mention them moving in what appears to be coordinated fashion, and several reports span decades and come from different parts of the lake. The backdrop to these dramatic encounters is important. Long before the first airplane ever flew over Iliamna, the region's indigenous cultures, Tlingit, Aleut, and Yupik peoples, passed down stories of giant aquatic beings in the lake. These creatures were sometimes described as fish-like monsters capable of ramming small canoes or shifting underwater like wolves in a pack. Efforts were made to coax tangible evidence from the lake. In 1980, the Anchorage Daily News famously offered a $100,000 reward, which would be equivalent to over $300,000 today, to anyone who could produce conclusive proof of one of these creatures. Despite the incentive and months of publicity, no one claimed the prize and no definitive proof was submitted. As the sun rises over Iliamna today and sockeye salmon begin their annual run, the lake still holds secrets in its depths. All we know for certain is that these sightings happened, that they span at least 8 decades, and that multiple credible witnesses have walked away convinced they saw something huge and inexplicable, and in a place where few have the chance to explore below the first few meters of darkness. That unknown is what makes Lake Iliamna's story feel, in every sense, more thrilling and potentially more terrifying than any sea monster cinema could depict, even the infamous Jaws. Before we move forward with the unmasking, let's look at what we're dealing with. Indigenous and local folklore. Lake Iliamna is more than a vast expanse of water tucked into the wilds of southwestern Alaska. It's a place whose name, its very etymology, echoes stories of something other. For centuries before the first airplane crossed its mirror-flat surface, indigenous peoples of the region carried tales of massive aquatic beings in these waters. To the Tenaina Indians who named the lake, Iliamna was the domain of a giant blackfish, a creature so powerful in lore that it was said to bite holes in canoes should careless travelers venture too close. And the traditions don't end there. Among Yupik elders in villages lining the lake's shores, the waters are steeped in mythology. Stories passed down through generations speak not just of unnamed monsters, but of places on the lake associated with deep currents, sudden fog, and accidents that befell travelers long ago. In some parts of the lake near Qiqirtarpak, the Big Island, elders recount how ancestors would make offerings of food or crackers to the rocks known as Kasaruayit, believing that such gifts would bring good weather and safe passage across those uncertain waters. Across different indigenous cultures, variants of the Iliamna lake creature appear under different names, each with its own nuance, but sharing a central truth. Something enormous and water-dwelling lives in the deep. Some regional accounts refer to beings like Gonakadet among the Tlingit people, a water spirit best described as a powerful, whale-like creature that commanded respect and fear. Elsewhere, tales speak of the Jig-Iknak, described by Aleutian storytellers as an aquatic force that moved in groups and was feared to attack and capsize canoes. These pre-contact narratives are part of a broader indigenous lore in Alaska that frequently attributes personhood or agency to powerful, elusive beings of the land and water. Although the Amikuk, Urayuli, and other mythic beings are different creatures in their own right, some said to swim through the ground or wander remote forests, they reflect a worldview in which the untamed landscapes of Alaska are alive and dangerous. When European settlers first arrived in the region in the 18th and 19th centuries, they encountered these indigenous stories and added their own accounts. Russian traders and early gold miners reported seeing large, fish-like creatures in the lake that matched local legends more closely than they did any known freshwater species. By the late 19th century, there were reports of animals estimated at over 20 feet long, described in serpentine or whale-like terms. For the indigenous people around Iliamna, the lake was not merely a place to fish, travel, or trade. It was a lived landscape, imbued with meaning and memory. The creatures of legend were not monsters in a caricatured sense, but powerful beings woven into the social and spiritual fabric of life. Today, as scientists and adventurers continue to search for physical evidence under the lake's shadowy surface, those ancient stories remain a powerful counterpoint, not tales of fantasy for entertainment's sake, but deeply rooted traditions that reflect how generations of indigenous Alaskans understood their environment, its dangers, and its mysteries. Whether any of these ancient accounts point to undiscovered biology or are instead a form of ecological memory, they stand as evidence of human engagement with Lake Iliamna's strange reputation long before the age of airplanes and sonar. And it's not just the monster. The lake itself is very intimidating. Why the lake is a perfect predator's habitat. Lake Iliamna isn't just big on maps. It's massive, mysterious, and ecologically complex in a way that makes it uniquely suited to sustain large, deep-water predators. Its physical features, remote location, and connection to the ocean through the Kvichak River create a setting that scientists and storytellers alike describe in thrilling terms. And it's worth laying out the factual anatomy of this lake to understand why it could be a predator's domain. First, consider the sheer scale of Lake Iliamna, stretching roughly 77 miles, or 124 kilometers, from end to end, and up to 22 miles, or 35 kilometers wide. It is the largest lake in Alaska and one of the largest freshwater lakes in North America. It covers over 1,000 square miles, about 2,622 square kilometers of surface area, and holds an enormous volume of water. Most lakes don't need to be this large to support complex ecosystems, but when you combine area, depth, and remoteness, you begin to understand why Lake Iliamna stands out. Beneath the surface, the lake remains largely unexplored. Its average depth is about 144 feet, or 44 meters, but in places it plunges to nearly 988 feet, or 301 meters, creating vast, black, uncharted waters where sunlight barely penetrates and scientific instruments rarely go. These deep reaches represent three-dimensional unlit habitats where a large predator could live with minimal disturbance. Many fish and marine mammals dive far below the surface, and in a lake as deep as Iliamna, those depths are just beginning to be studied. In this deep, cold environment, water temperatures remain frigid year-round. Cold, oxygenated water can sustain large predators, and fewer human intrusions mean that whatever lives in the depths of Iliamna is rarely seen. During long winter months, ice covers much of the lake, reducing surface access further and cutting off easy observation. This means that species that thrive here can do so without constant human interference, which drastically increases the chance that large, elusive organisms could persist undetected. Part of what makes Lake Iliamna so remarkable is that it isn't completely isolated from the sea. Through the Kvichak River, this freshwater giant drains into Bristol Bay and ultimately the Bering Sea. The river itself is navigable along its entire length, forming a water highway between the ocean and the lake that carries billions of salmon each year as they migrate upstream to spawn. These salmon runs are so massive that they constitute one of the largest sockeye salmon migrations in the world, feeding not just bears and eagles, but also an array of aquatic predators. That ocean connection has profound implications. Most freshwater lakes are cut off from marine life, but Iliamna's direct hydrological link to salt water means that marine species occasionally travel upriver. Documented cases exist of harbor seals moving between Bristol Bay and Iliamna via the Kvichak River, and genetic studies show these freshwater seals are closely related to their ocean cousins. Even beluga whales, creatures of the Arctic seas, have been observed in the Kvichak River and near the mouth of Lake Iliamna in certain seasons. Belugas are known to swim miles up rivers following salmon runs, and they've been spotted within reach of the lake's entrance. This connection also fuels discussion about the potential presence of large marine predator species coming in from the ocean. Among the contenders is the Pacific sleeper shark, Somniosus pacificus, a slow-moving but formidable deep-water shark inhabiting the North Pacific and Arctic Oceans. Sleeper sharks can attain lengths of up to about 4.4 meters, or 14 feet, in verified specimens, and possibly even as much as 7 meters, or 23 feet, perhaps even more, based on some documented individuals elsewhere in the world. They are adapted to cold, deep water and are known to feed on fish, cephalopods, and even marine mammals. In fact, back in 2012, a Pacific sleeper shark was filmed in a nearby brackish lagoon connected to marine waters. A deep, cold lake rich with salmon, trout, and an unusual population of freshwater seals provides a perfectly viable prey base for large predators adapted to ambush, deep hunting, and long periods without food. Salmon runs upstream bring millions of fish into the lake each year. Lake Iliamna is part nursery, part highway, and part deep water refuge. Exactly the kind of ecosystem that can sustain high-level predators over time if they exist there. Add to that the limited human footprint.
This pristine setting and this intact ecosystem sustaining life, and Kvichak is the artery.
The lake's shores are sparsely populated by small communities like Iliamna, New Halen, Kokonok, Pedro Bay, and Igiugig, each with just hundreds of residents at most. There are no roads connecting the lake to the broader state highway system, so most visitors arrive by boat or plane. This isolation means that most of the lake's 1,000 square miles are seldom disturbed. The lake's remarkable depth provides vertical space for predators to hunt below the sunlit zones. Its cold, oxygen-rich waters support a robust food web from salmon and trout up to seals and potentially large fish. Its hydrological connection to the sea provides an occasional corridor for ocean-adapted predators to enter and exploit freshwater resources. Combine that with minimal human disturbance, and the conditions become exceptionally favorable for large, stealthy apex predators. This sets the stage in a way that few other freshwater environments can. Deep, cold, connected, rich in prey, and largely unexplored. And this mysterious monster is far more terrifying than cinematic creations. Why it's scarier than Jaws. What distinguishes Iliamna's reports from the classic cinematic terror of a 25-foot great white shark is scale. In the 2017 season, residents of the lakeside village of Kokonok reported spotting not just one, but multiple animals offshore, one estimated at 50 to 60 feet long, with smaller individuals trailing behind like a pod. Witnesses described the largest creature blowing water at the surface and surfacing briefly in a manner reminiscent of whales. That's more than double the length of the shark in Jaws.
He said it's longer than the boat. And the boat was almost like 32-footer.
There's a chilling psychological element embedded in these size estimates. To imagine a 60-foot body suddenly breaking the surface or shifting beneath the unseen waterline of a remote Alaskan lake, especially for people accustomed to salmon and seals rather than beasts, creates a primal fear response. Pilots and fishermen who've lived and worked around Iliamna for decades describe seeing dozens of large shapes beneath the water in a formation, leading some to talk in terms of group behavior rather than isolated sightings. Multiple large animals moving together is unusual in the world of large aquatic predators. Jaws, after all, tells the story of a single great white shark, a solitary hunter acting independently. In contrast, several reports from Iliamna hint at collective activity. In the 2017 Kokonok sighting, adults and children watching through binoculars described several dark shapes moving in the water together. This has given rise to talk of pack hunting behavior, a trait rarely associated with fish and almost never with sharks outside of very specific species of predatory fish that hunt schools of smaller fish. Such group behavior, but among giant creatures, paired with estimated lengths far exceeding known freshwater predators, makes the legend sound more ominous than Spielberg's cinematic shark. But it's not just the size that unnerves, it's the elusiveness. Moreover, the Iliamna sightings have a pattern that unsettles even the people who know the lake best. They appear without warning, stir up a wave of excitement and unease, and then slip back into silence as if nothing was ever there. One of the most talked about modern accounts comes from Gary Nielsen, a longtime fisherman from the village of Kokonok, a small community perched along the southern shore of Lake Iliamna. Nielsen has spent decades on these waters, reading currents, tracking salmon runs, and recognizing the difference between a seal, a wave pattern, and something that simply doesn't belong. In interviews and local reports, Nielsen spoke about being out on the lake when the water ahead of him began to change. Not violently, not with splashing chaos, but with movement beneath the surface. Then, for just a moment, something surfaced. He didn't describe teeth or roaring or anything exaggerated. What he described was a massive shape, smooth and dark, rising just enough to be seen before slipping back under. No thrashing, no prolonged exposure. It was just there, and then it was gone. Nielsen didn't claim certainty about what he saw. He didn't name it. Instead, he emphasized what stood out to him as a fisherman, the size and the behavior. According to him, the animal was far larger than anything he had encountered in the lake before. larger than seals, larger than any fish he had ever pulled from these waters. And more importantly, it moved with intention, not like debris, not like a drifting log, not like a startled animal reacting to a boat. In another widely discussed moment from 2017, Nielsen and other residents of Kvichak observed activity offshore. This time, it wasn't just a single fleeting glimpse. Multiple witnesses, some using binoculars, reported seeing several large shapes in the water at once, including one that Nielsen and others estimated could be as long as 50 to 60 feet, with smaller shapes trailing behind it. He described what looked like a blow or disturbance at the surface, almost whale-like, though no whales are known to inhabit the lake. The shapes moved slowly, then disappeared, again, not in panic, but with a kind of calm, controlled descent into the depths. Perhaps most unnerving is what some longtime residents report. Muted attacks, near misses. These tales come from fishermen and villagers whose daily lives depend on reading Lake Iliamna correctly. In the 1970s and 1980s, fishermen working near Pedro Bay and along the eastern stretches of the lake reported nets being torn or violently disturbed in ways that didn't match typical catches or snags. In a few cases, the nets came back damaged, without the usual signs of entanglement in rocks or debris, leaving behind a question mark rather than a clear cause. There are also boat-level encounters, the kind that stay with people because they happen so quickly and so close. Several residents from villages like Kvichak and New Highland have described moments where small boats experienced unexpected jolts or bumps from below, not enough to capsize them, but enough to be felt clearly through the hull. These incidents are rarely dramatic, but they carry a distinct unease. In calm water, with no floating debris and no visible animals nearby, a sudden upward nudge from beneath is difficult to explain away. Witnesses often describe looking over the side immediately afterward, only to find nothing, just dark, opaque water. A group of fishermen in the late 1970s reported seeing a large, dark shape pass directly under their boat, followed by a strong lateral movement of water that rocked the vessel slightly. According to the retelling, the shape did not surface fully, but its outline, long, smooth, and far larger than a seal, was visible just beneath the surface for a few seconds before it disappeared into deeper water. Even earlier, in the decades following the 1942 aerial sighting by Babe Allsworth and Bill Hammersley, there were scattered reports from local travelers describing canoes or small boats being approached or followed by something unseen. These accounts, often passed down, describe water trailing behind vessels in an unusual way, as if something were moving just out of sight below. In some cases, the wake didn't match the boat's own movement, suggesting a second force traveling alongside or beneath it. However, there are no confirmed fatalities, no documented predatory attacks. So, what is the monster? Scientific investigations and limits. The chill of early morning on Lake Iliamna can be deceptive. From shore, it looks serene. Flat water under a gray sky, sockeye salmon leaping, and freshwater seals bobbing quietly. But beneath that placid surface lies nearly 1,000 feet of unlit, unexplored water, a realm so vast and deep that even modern scientific tools struggle to penetrate it. Scientists, local researchers, and independent explorers have tried to lift the veil. Yet after decades of effort, no definitive evidence of an unknown species has ever been produced. That absence of proof is itself part of the mystery. Over the years, various scientific approaches have been brought to bear on the question of what, if anything, might be lurking in those depths. In the late 1970s and early 1980s, the Anchorage Daily News made headlines by offering a $100,000 reward to anyone who could produce clear evidence of the so-called monster in Iliamna. The prize was meant to incentivize serious documentation, tangible proof, a carcass, a clear photograph, something definitive. But the offer expired with no claim. In more recent decades, researchers have turned to technology for answers that human eyes alone can't gather. In 2019, a team that included camera specialist Charlotte Levy planned to use DNA sampling and underwater video to investigate the lake's deepest zones. The idea was straightforward: lower cameras and collect environmental DNA from the water to see if traces of unknown organisms might show up. The technique is used elsewhere in ecology to detect rare or elusive species, but the results from Iliamna's depths have so far been inconclusive. Sightings are reported, but nothing in the DNA samples has definitively matched an unknown creature. Underwater camera deployments have been tried more than once, often with creative setups and local collaboration. Fishermen like Mark Stigar and biologist Bruce Wright have built robust rigs with baited cameras in hopes of capturing a glimpse of the mysterious creature firsthand. During early deployments in 2019 and 2020, the camera systems did attract attention, so much so that in at least one case, something large tore part of the metal housing off the equipment boat before the batteries died. But frustratingly, in every case, the critical footage that might settle the question was never recorded. The power ran out, or the view was obscured. Nor has sonar delivered the breakthrough many had hoped for. While teams have run sonar surveys across parts of the lake to look for large underwater forms, no consistent unexplained sonar return, like the kind that would suggest a huge moving body, has been verified in peer-reviewed scientific channels. Reports of objects deep in the lake occasionally surface in local lore or unaffiliated websites, but there is no published scientific sonar data confirming a massive, unidentified organism. Even when multiple eyewitness accounts describe something unusual, the scientific method demands repeatable, verifiable physical evidence. A reported sighting by a biologist from an aircraft remains an eyewitness account, not proof. Pilots and fishermen who have reported metallic-looking backs, unusual group formations, and the movement of more than one large creature certainly add intrigue, but first-hand testimony can't stand alone in scientific verification. And that's where the limits of investigation become most stark. No physical specimen, dead or alive, has ever been documented. In every major lake system with an undiscovered apex predator, at some point, a carcass, bone, or body fragment typically turns up. In Iliamna, after decades of sightings dating back to the 1940s, this has not happened. Whether it's because the monster, if it exists, is exceptionally rare, extraordinarily elusive, occupies the very deepest waters, or simply doesn't exist at all, the result is the same. No confirmed biological sample has been produced. Scientists and field biologists haven't ignored alternative explanations. The lake is known to contain rare freshwater harbor seals, one of only a few such populations in the world, and these seals have been a subject of research themselves only recently, with a 2024 genetic study suggesting they might be a distinct, endemic population of harbor seal not found elsewhere in the Pacific. Large known species could plausibly explain at least some sightings. Sturgeon, prehistoric-looking fish known to grow very large in other regions, have entered Iliamna through the Kvichak River from the ocean. Green sturgeon were caught in nets on the Naknek Beach in the mid-1990s, suggesting sturgeon could navigate upstream. However, sturgeon do not typically grow to the 30-plus foot sizes described in some reports, nor do they exhibit coordinated group hunting behavior. Another candidate scientists have discussed is the Pacific sleeper shark, a cold-water deep-sea shark known in Alaskan coastal waters. These sharks can grow to around up to 20 feet.
It states they have a max length of about 6 meters, so almost 20 feet.
And feed on a variety of fish and marine mammals. In 2012, a documented video captured a Pacific sleeper shark in a shallow brackish lagoon near King Cove, Alaska, proving numerically that this species exists in environments outside deep ocean basins and hinting at their adaptability. Verified individuals typically reach 12 to 20 feet, though precise maximum sizes remain uncertain because these sharks inhabit deep, low-visibility environments that are rarely observed directly. What makes this species compelling in the context of Lake Iliamna isn't just its size. It's its adaptability, behavior, and ecological fit. These sharks are not strictly confined to abyssal depths. They can move into coastal and mixed salinity environments, especially when following prey. Given that Lake Iliamna connects to the Bering Sea via the Kvichak River and hosts massive seasonal salmon runs, the pathway and the incentive for such movement exist. Under those conditions, several reported features begin to align. The sleeper shark's movement is slow, smooth, and almost eerily controlled, often described as gliding rather than swimming. Seen from above through cold, rippling water, that motion could appear larger and more deliberate than it truly is. Its dark, slightly reflective skin can produce a dull, metallic sheen under certain lighting angles, especially in low sun or overcast conditions, matching repeated descriptions from witnesses. Then there are the near-miss encounters. A large sleeper shark passing beneath a vessel could easily create that kind of displacement without ever surfacing. It doesn't need to attack. Its sheer mass and proximity are enough to be felt. To a fisherman, a quiet jolt from something unseen is unforgettable. Even the idea of group movement can be partially explained. While sleeper sharks are not true pack hunters, they are opportunistic feeders. During peak salmon migrations, multiple individuals could gather in the same feeding zone. From a distance, especially with limited visibility, several large bodies moving in proximity could appear coordinated, giving the impression of intelligence or pack behavior. Where the explanation begins to break down is in the largest reported sizes, 50 to 60 feet, which exceed any confirmed measurements. But human perception over open water is unreliable. Without reference points, size can easily be overestimated, especially in brief, high-tension encounters. So, under the right conditions, cold, murky water, reflective light, abundant prey, and limited visibility, the Pacific sleeper shark can plausibly account for many of the Iliamna reports. The stealth, the sudden encounters, the metallic backs, even the illusion of coordinated movement, but not all of them. And that remaining gap is exactly what keeps the mystery alive. This lake monster is scarier than Jaws, because it's real. And just look at it. It is nightmarish. Well, that's it for now. Thanks for watching. Did you like this video? If you did, please consider liking, dropping a comment, and hitting the subscribe button so that you don't miss out on our new uploads. Also, don't miss this video you see on your screen right now. It's truly unbelievable.